guys, how's it doing, and welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be the final episode in the 135th Tamyia Command Vehicle, sorry, Command Car even. It'll be the last episode of the series, because in this one we're going to be looking at making the diorama base, and as always at the end of the video there'll be some nice detailed photos of the complete model. So, I don't know if you can remember if you've watched the first episode. Obviously all the links to all the videos can be in the description below. I actually named this project in deep, kind of for two sort of reasons. Is the fact that they're stuck in deep, and because these guys generally operated quite deep behind enemy lines, so I thought, why not in deep. For the base, we're going to be using mainly some of this modelling foam. This stuff's great for all sorts of things. It's really good for using, obviously, for bases. You can use these for like making brick walls, brick roads, anything like that. Obviously, unlike me, I'm not that artistically good at sort of scratch building those sort of things, but you know, if you've got a good hands and you know, good with a knife and all that, you shouldn't have a problem with that. It's also quite good for making buildings as well. So because I want to make this, I don't want it to be too flat. So this stuff's going to be great to be able to carve into. And it's not messy either, because a lot of the time I've usually used you know, like polystyrene type foam, or like insulation foam, which also is good stuff. It's reasonably priced, that stuff is. I think if I remember rightly, of that size, I think I've got about 4 or 5 blocks for around about £10–15, I think. Possibly could be less than that. I got it a long time ago, so I've forgotten. So it's quite cheap to get hold of. But so is, you know, like using insulation foam and stuff like that is really, you know, quite reasonably priced. You get some cheap stuff. Obviously it's not going to be expensive, but obviously, you know, the polystyrene stuff and the insulation foam, it's really messy when you cut out. There's like dust and all sorts of stuff all over the place. This stuff's not too bad. Also, if you can cut it kind of right in the first place, you can quite easily reuse you know, the offcuts from that. But so I don't want to make it too flat. Obviously I need to deepen sort of some ruts. So obviously, like the vehicle is going through sand, so it's going to dig in a little bit, and obviously where the toilet's got stuck, I need to take a bit of a chunk out there as well. Also, the plan is to sort of have a bit at the front, sort of drop off, so like sort of like the roads on like a bit of a, not some sort of cliff, but you know, like a cliff type face, just probably hopefully a bit in the corner. So babbling on enough, let's get onto the bench and have a bit of a better look at it. Right, so you can see we've marked out everything that we want to put in place. So you can see cut areas I've marked out for the terrain, tyre tracks, and a little bit of terrain at the back there as well. Like I said, this stuff's really easy to sort of cut out. Pretty much very little mess. Just a decent sharp hobby knife or standing blade or whatever, just to cut out all those bits and pieces that we don't want. Also, every so often we want to try and make sure we know where we're putting our pieces in the sort of right areas, whether we need to cut more off or a little bit less. So like you can see that little last stone there, we need to sort of, because the shape underneath it needs sinking into the base itself. So I'll mark around that area and just cut that chunk out, continuously dry fitting it to make sure you know, it sits exactly the way we want it to. To make things a little bit quicker and easier, if you've got something like a rotary tool, you know, to cut out these sort of ruts, or to be fair, any real part of this, this makes things a hell of a lot easier and again a lot quicker to cut out all the bits and pieces that we don't want. And just like before, just keep checking that we've got it the way we want it, the right, in the case of this for the tyres, we want them to be the right depth. So every so often just keep checking that. Do a little bit at a time, because we don't want to be taking too much, because it's going to be difficult to try and either build that back up and get it back, you know, go back a couple of steps to get it right. So take your time with it, and I said keep checking with the relevant parts that you're going to be putting into those areas. Like I said, just keep dry fitting and taking small bits out at a time. Now, it does help in the case of having four wheels. We want to keep checking, you know, that we have got the width right for the tyres to fit in. And with the case of cutting, as you can see, it's sat a little bit further back than it was originally planned, but that's no major biggie. But yeah, just keep cutting. Also, having a vacuum to hand also helps a little bit, keep some of that little bit of mess. When you're using a rotary tool, obviously it will make a little bit more mess being just dust and just cutting it out. So it's always good to have something like that on hand. It's not a necessity, just dustpan and brush will do. But as you can see again, this is just making quicker work of just roughing that up terrain. This also will help what I'm going to put on top, which is going to be plaster. It'll just help it, you know, adhere to the foam a little bit better as well. So using, I'm just using basic good old house plaster. I basically mix this into quite a fairly soupy, pasty type consistency. Doesn't particularly matter really on the consistency. I've done various different consistencies for different sort of things. I've used these for sort of like rock faces, so the sort of the least amount of water you put in gives you that really rough texture. But because I want this for the base, I'll make it quite pasty, and quite simply just completely cover the areas that we want to, you know, obviously cover. I've also, in the case of this part, I've actually used it as an adhesive, if you like, for the lower rock formation on this part of the diorama. Now, because I've made it quite thin and pasty, it also quite good for filling in some of those gaps as well that we don't want. So you can see I've moved to, like, I don't actually know what these are called, but I'm going to call it an artist's trowel. These are usually used for, you know, people that paint with oils and whatnot. So don't really worry about how it's looking. So if you get this quite sort of chunky texture, don't worry about it, because we can sort this out in a little while, just before it all starts to dry out. So what we're going to do to smooth it out is quite simply an old naff brush that you don't too worried about, and just, you know, cover it all, the surface and area, and this will flatten out that plaster, and you'll end up with something pretty much like that. So because I want to get a slight bit of raise in the back, fortunately, because the way I cut the chunk off the front, there was a perfect corner, so it matched with the back, so that made things a lot easier. And exactly the same before, covering that area plaster. This is also going to sort of, the bits that are going to be missing, because of course there's going to be a stone that's placed on top there. And again, using that as a bit of adhesive, and just filling out all those you know, excess areas that we want filled. And again, as before, to get rid of those rough edges, another loaded brush of tap water. Says it just makes things easy to smooth these edges out, because sometimes they do come up a bit rough, and because of course there is some level of grit in this plaster, and to be fair, I've had this plaster for about 6 years, so it's not particularly brilliant plaster. It would be great for plastering your walls, but it's great for this. Now, to frame the base, I'm using balsa wood. It's nice and thin, it's really light as well, and very easy to cut. And all I do is just, because I'm terrible at measuring, so I've placed it up against the side of the diorama, and as you can see there, with a pencil, just marking out those wavy lines. I tend to find this, you know, adds a little bit more to the model than just having squared out straight sides. You know, so just adds that little, I find it adds that little bit more to it. And to cut it, it's quite simple as using your hobby blade. It's really easy to cut through. You know, there's no real work in it whatsoever. But as you can see there, it looks quite nice across the side, Can sand it down. If it's protruding too high, again, you're probably best you know, cutting less and then putting it to it and then cutting off any excess that's you know, protruding over the sides. And all we need to do to glue it is some good old PVA, and I used some tacking pins to tack it to the side of the base, and basically weighted it and let that dry, and obviously then it's completely adhered to the model. So now with the sides on, we can see there are a few gaps, easily sorted out. Put a bit of masking tape over the edge of the frame, and again some really thin plaster, and just fill those gaps in, preferably a little bit before it dries out. Remove the masking tape, because if you let it dry, which I did a little bit too much, it does pull a little bit of the plaster away. Fortunately in this case it wasn't too bad. And also again, tap water and a brush just to smooth that off and blend it all in. So for the scatter, I used builder sand because it was something I had to hand. Took a lot of sieving because there was quite a large chunks of stone in there, which we didn't want. And the same as always, when you put in scatter down to a base, bit of PVA glue, and sprinkle that over, and spread it out with a brush. Also quite a good tip, I didn't do it at this point, but you'll see me do it a little bit later on with a bit more scatter. If you have some, or get some, it's quite cheap, some isopropanol, which is basically rubbing alcohol. If you spray that down first, actually, or even after, I don't think it really actually matters too much. It helps the PVA spread a little bit more and get more coverage out of the PVA. So as it is around those big stones, it looks a little bit sparse, so I added a few small stones just to, you know, add a bit more to the area, because it looks really bland. And using some, as you can see, very thinned out PVA glue, just using water. Put all that out and then just scatter the stones out, so the land's relatively random. As there is a little bit of gradient there, so you know, you might need to pop a couple on by hand. So what I'm doing now is adding a little bit more glue just to get some of those stones glued into place properly. Some are a bit loose as well, and using a slightly coarser sand just to fill in around those slightly smaller boulders. I just feel this added just a little bit more again to the area and sort of bumped it out a little bit. So on to the painting. I decided to sort of shade in the track where the vehicle is going to be, admittedly most of which you're not going to see because obviously the vehicle will cover it, and also I shaded in basically all the large and the smaller stones in as well. So after all that, I gave everything a light misting of desert sand, and also going into some of them cracks and recesses as well. I did after that go over with a very fine layer of buff from both of these are from obviously Tamyia. For the stone I used some com art. I've never really particularly used these all that much, they're quite new to me. But they're very thin, they're great straight through the airbrush. They've got quite a bit of a strong smell to them, so I'd use these in a very ventilated area. I don't think they're very harmful, but you know, just safe side, wear a mask. So I'll mix the three together, sort of try and attempt to make this sort of reddish stone colour. Didn't turn out too badly, it wasn't quite the way I wanted, but I was quite happy with that in the ends, and gave those a little bit of a light highlighting. And then all that was really left to do was paint the frame of the base, quite simple, matte black, which makes everything stand out quite nicely. Now for the last little bit of details on the base itself, I've used some of these self-adhesive tufts of grass. You could pick these up from all sorts of places, it's relatively cheap, or you could buy a set like a starter pack, which I did, and got all sorts, and I think they were about £5 or thereabouts. And all I did was I cut them up to sort of smaller pieces because I didn't want major massive tufts, and then just stick them down. You can also use a little bit of PVA glue as well to help them stick, but to be fair, they adhere quite well on their own. So all next is to do is start putting everything into place. With the vehicle, I did a little bit of super glue to the tyres to keep that hopefully completely glued to the base. And then all that was next to do was start putting on the figures. Now, because the base is relatively soft, apart from obviously the plaster on top, you can either use a small drill bit or a little bit of a bodger, like I'm using here, which to be fair is an old airbrush needle. All you need to do is just mark out the places that you want, you want your figure to go, because obviously I've put pins in the bottom of these to help me paint them, and which also makes them a great little way of helping you glue them to the base. And of course, when we stick them in place, just use some good old super glue. What's also a good thing to do when doing your bases, preferably way before you get to this stage, is basically map everything out and in the sort of positions that you want them to be in. And then what I always do is I take a photo, just in case I end up taking the models off for a long period of time, and with my short memory it's quite easily to forget what I actually wanted to do. So that gives you a good reference to go back to. It may change the time that you come to putting your base on altogether. Admittedly, a couple of these figures aren't in the original positions I wanted. Now, These are the very last fine details I've put onto the model. You're probably going to want some magnifying glasses for these, because these are tiny and very fiddly. I got some brass rounds, empty shell cases. Now I couldn't find proper 303s, so what I did managed to find from Master were 7.92mm, which is for German ammunition. In my personal opinion, at this sort of scale, you're not really going to notice, I don't think, unless you're there, you know, with your tape measures and whatnots to prove me otherwise. But to be fair, I think these add a great bit of detail. They're roughly about £5 a pack, and there's 25 rounds in each. I bought 2, so there's roughly around about 30 rounds on there. I lost 2. As you can see, very fiddly to play around with. So there we go, guys, we are nearly there. I'm nearly ready to show you the final diorama, but I'm sure you can agree those brass rounds do make a nice little addition, you know, to making this vehicle look even more used than it already is. But it says they are very fiddly to mess around with, and stuff like that I find very difficult to try and place and make them look natural. Probably could have done with maybe another 2 or 3 packets of those, but I think they would have drove me mad trying to put all those in. But yeah, but before we get to the final piece, just like to say thank you very much for watching. Thanks for making it this far into the video. Also, I hope you've enjoyed the series. If it's the first part of the series that you're watching, links are down below to the first few episodes. But if you're new around here and you have enjoyed, please like and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. So yeah, again, thanks very much for watching. It's very much appreciated. The support even is also very greatly appreciated. Any comments, whatever they may be, please put them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And here's the final piece.